When this arrogant 38-year-old police officer walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom and made the fatal mistake of arguing with the judge about the law itself, what happened next would not only destroy his career, but become a legendary lesson about respect, authority, and why some battles should never be fought. This story shows us what happens when badge-wearing arrogance meets decades of judicial wisdom, when someone mistakes their uniform for unlimited authority, and when a law enforcement officer discovers that knowing how to enforce the law and knowing how to interpret the law are two very different things. But before we dive into this incredible legal showdown, less than 3% of you watching are actually subscribed. So please hit that subscribe button, because this story about professional boundaries and the consequences of challenging judicial authority deserves to reach everyone who needs to understand that respect for the legal system goes both ways. It's a busy Wednesday morning in Providence Municipal Court, and Judge Frank Caprio is handling his usual docket of traffic violations and municipal infractions. The early spring air carries the promise of warmer days, but inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is about to become very heated indeed. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the courtroom doors open with unusual authority, and in strides Officer Derek Thompson, a 38-year-old police sergeant with the Providence Police Department. Thompson moves with the swagger of someone who believes his badge grants him special privileges in every situation. His uniform is pressed to perfection, his boots shine like mirrors, and his entire demeanor radiates the kind of superiority complex that comes from years of being the authority figure in every encounter. Officer Thompson is here because 3 weeks ago, he received a citation for parking in a handicapped space while off duty. The violation occurred outside Tony's restaurant, where Thompson had stopped for lunch while driving his personal vehicle. The fine is standard MIT's $300 plus court costs. But Thompson isn't here to pay anything. He's here because he believes his law enforcement status should exempt him from what he considers civilian parking regulations. What Thompson doesn't realize is that he's about to challenge a judge who has been interpreting and applying the law since before Thompson was old enough to drive, let alone wear a badge. As Thompson approaches the defendant's stand, his body language immediately establishes a confrontational tone. He doesn't remove his police cap, doesn't stand at attention, and keeps his badge prominently displayed, as if to remind everyone in the courtroom of his law enforcement status. Officer Derek Thompson, the court clerk announces, reading from the docket. Thompson steps forward with obvious impatience, his hand resting on his duty belt in a gesture that's more intimidating than respectful. Judge Caprio looks up from his paperwork with the experienced eye of someone who has dealt with every type of defendant imaginable, including law enforcement officers who think their badges make them above civilian law. Officer Thompson, Judge Caprio begins, his voice carrying the measured authority of 35 years on the bench. You're charged with parking in a handicapped space while off duty, in violation of City Ordinance 12-7. The violation occurred on March 15th at 1:30 p.m. outside Tony's restaurant. How do you plead? Thompson's response immediately signals that this case will be unlike anything the courtroom has seen before. Your Honor, Thompson says, his voice carrying the tone of someone who believes he's explaining something obvious to a child. I'm pleading not guilty because this citation represents a fundamental misapplication of parking enforcement policies as they relate to sworn law enforcement personnel. Judge Caprio sets down his pen, never a positive sign for defendants who think they can lecture him about the law. Officer Thompson, were you on duty at the time of the violation? No, Your Honor, but as a sworn police officer, I maintain certain responsibilities and authorities that require flexible interpretation of civilian parking restrictions. The courtroom becomes very quiet. Thompson has just suggested that his police status gives him the right to ignore laws that apply to everyone else, even when he's off duty. Officer Thompson, were you responding to an emergency or conducting official police business? Thompson's irritation becomes visible. Not at that specific moment, Your Honor, but law enforcement officers must be ready to respond to situations that civilians cannot handle. This requires certain operational flexibilities. Judge Caprio's expression doesn't change, but veteran court watchers recognize the signs of a judge who is about to deliver a legal education. Officer Thompson, can you cite the specific statute or regulation that exempts off-duty police officers from handicapped parking requirements? Thompson pauses, clearly not having expected to be challenged on legal specifics. Your Honor, with all due respect, police operational protocols supersede municipal parking ordinances. Any experienced law enforcement professional would understand this. The silence that follows is deafening. Thompson has just condescendingly suggested that Judge Caprio lacks understanding of law enforcement operations and legal hierarchies. But Thompson isn't finished making the biggest mistake of his career. Your Honor, Thompson continues, his voice taking on an openly disrespectful tone, I've been enforcing these laws on the street for 15 years. I think I have a better understanding of how they're supposed to work in practice than someone who only sees them from behind a bench. The courtroom erupts in shocked murmurs. Thompson has just insulted Judge Caprio's understanding of the law and suggested that street-level enforcement experience is superior to judicial expertise. What Judge Caprio does next will systematically destroy Thompson's arrogance and potentially end his law enforcement career forever. Judge Caprio slowly removes his glasses, the gesture that signals something significant is about to happen. He sets them down with deliberate precision and looks directly at Thompson with the calm, measured expression that has made him both respected and feared. Officer Thompson, Judge Caprio says, his voice remaining perfectly controlled, I want to make sure I understand your position correctly. Are you arguing that your 15 years of police experience give you greater authority to interpret the law than this court? Thompson, emboldened by what he mistakes for uncertainty, doubles down on his disrespect. Your Honor, I'm simply stating that practical law enforcement requires understanding legal applications that might not be apparent from a purely academic or theoretical perspective. Judge Caprio nods slowly, as if carefully considering Thompson's words. I see. Officer Thompson, since you've questioned this court's understanding of law enforcement and legal interpretation, let me ask you some questions about your case. The judge opens a thick file that had been sitting on his desk. Officer Thompson, you mentioned 15 years of police experience. Can you tell me your current rank and assignment? Thompson straightens his shoulders proudly. Sergeant, Your Honor. Traffic Division Supervisor. Traffic Division. So you